the Light 'em Up Lounge. Welcome, one and all. Yet again, it's Wednesday. It's time for our weekly live gathering here at our cozy and comfortable lounge. I hope you all had a wonderful week thus far. And let's rock and roll the show with a very special guest. I was so much looking forward to today's segment with no other than Jeff Borschiewicz. We're going to talk about his Florida sun-grown operations, Corona Cigar Company, and all things Jeff Borschiewicz. So without further ado, Jeff, it is a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Reinhard, thank you for inviting me to the show. I'm excited. This is such a diverse global audience, and I love talking about cigars, and I love the way cigars bridge the world, in my opinion. Everybody that enjoys a cigar, doesn't matter where you're from or what part of the earth you're on, we all have a common bond, loving that cigar and enjoying the time smoking with great friends and camaraderie.
I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly sort of the foundation and the core principles that Light 'em Up as a community and as a platform has been built. For all of you who are joining us, if you have any questions, for those of you watching the Facebook live stream, please put all the questions underneath the live stream into the comments. I'll make sure to bring them all up, bring them to the show so we can forward them to Jeff. And for all our dearest friends and family here at the Zoom Lounge, you know the spiel. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or make yourselves heard. Raise your hand, and we would love to hear all your wonderful questions. But before we start with the tobacco and cigar talk, I found a very little interesting side information, Jeff, that you were a tractor driving champion of Florida in high school, and twice, I have to say. So that already links us a little bit, obviously, to the growing operations, the agriculture and the farming. But how on earth does one become a tractor driving champion of the state of Florida?
Well, in the United States, there's a very large organization called Future Farmers of America that works with the junior high schools and high schools all across the country. And it's been around probably for 125 years. And when I was a kid, I was a member of that since the 9th grade all the way through my senior year. And for 3 years, I was competing in that. It's a skilled course that you drive through and a written test on mechanical operation and things like that. And I just loved it. And I was able to do it for win the state champion twice, and then they wouldn't let me compete anymore. So they wanted to spread it around a little bit, who else could do it. But it was a great chapter. I've always had a passion for agriculture. And as a kid, you know, I had a horse and cows and things like that, but we only lived on 5 acres when I was a kid. So it was just like a little hobby farm type of thing. I don't know how it is in Europe. I'm sure it's probably even more so, that unless you are a generational farmer, it's almost impossible to get land to farm on. So I always had that passion, but it was never a career for me. But that was my thing that I liked when I was a kid. And fast forward, 45 years later, now I have a farm and grow tobacco and actually do that kind of stuff. So it's always been something that, it's like anything. If it's a passion, you always tend to do it better, because you don't mind putting in the hard work, even though you have tons of obstacles thrown in front of you.
Yeah, well, a few interesting points there. I mean, how do people nowadays become farmers? Like, to start with, as you said, you need land, which is not cheap these days.
It's not.
Labor costs are super high and expensive in the US as in Europe. So that's an ever-evolving challenge. And we get all sorts of crop and raw materials from other parts of the world. But like, what then on earth made you go into that, venture into that, and start tobacco farming after it stopped in Florida in 1977?
So I started traveling to Nicaragua. I started Corona Cigar Company in 1996, and I started traveling to Central America. I think it was 1998. It's probably my first trip. I went to Costa Rica. Back then, there was CAO cigars used to be made in a factory where they made the Tony Berhani cigars as well. Mm-hmm. And after that, I went to with Christian Iroa. He had Justo Iroa on the show a couple weeks ago. I was watching that earlier, and okay. And then watching the Iroa operation, I just always loved farming and seeing the whole process, and it was always something I really enjoyed. So after about 15 years of, actually more than that, 20 something years of traveling to Central America, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Honduras, and just spending a lot of times in the farm, I just had the opportunity to start one, and I wanted to do it here in Florida. Not so much to be a commercial grower, because there's a reason there's no tobacco farms left in Florida. It's because it's just economically impossible to commercially grow that crop as a farmer and turn a profit. But because we have so many retail stores and our ability to sell cigars, if you're the end of that product chain where you can retail it, you can therefore grow the tobacco because you're the guy selling it. And even though you don't really make money on it, you can make the farm sustainable and make a very unique product out of it. And that was what our goal is, and that's what we do today.
A lot of obstacles and hurdles to overcome. I mean, one being urbanization now, people moving into the big cities, the sex appeal of local farming and gardening is probably more in an urban setting than in a rural setting, and it's probably not as appealing to the younger generation anymore to venture into something like that.
Well, what we've seen, at least in America, is that you have seen a shift where some people are wanting they really do like the rural lifestyle. So you'll see more and more small plots, and I say small plots, 5-10 acre plots that are getting built out, and people putting a little homestead out there. But what really has happened in America is that the big farms, as the biggest challenge in the US about farms being generational, is that when the family members die, the husband and wife, then it gets willed to their children, but then there's an estate tax on it. So then they have to pay a tax based on the value of the farm. And then there's a saying in farming that you're land rich but cash poor. So in order to get the cash to pay the tax, then you have to sell off part of the farm, plus the farm gets divided amongst family members. So let's say if it started with 1,000 acres, then it's going to go down, you got to sell off 300 acres or 400 acres to pay the taxes. Now you're down to 600, and if you had 3 kids, now you're down to 200 acres. So something was 1,000, it's now 2. You see how that happens in one generation. So then the next generation, the same thing happens again. So unless the family members buy each other out, a lot of these big farms are getting scooped up. And that's why Bill Gates is the largest holder of farmland in America. And a lot of the other big companies, China's heavily invested in farms all over the world, actually. So it is getting harder and harder for the family farms. They continue to go out of business. It is something that I think globally that people do need to be aware of and just keep an eye on it, because I don't know, during COVID, we had some things shut down in America where it's dangerous when you have for example, all the meat in America goes through 4 big packing houses. And if one of those 4 goes offline, like one did not too long ago with the cyber attack, that's 25% of the beef industry that's gone. So anyway, I know it's a little bit off topic, but it is about agriculture, and we all got to eat, right?
Most certainly. Well, besides your love and passion for agriculture and farming, the cigar industry is truly what sort of ignited your passion and started the journey. And if I'm not mistaken, Corona Cigar started as a mail order company, correct?
Yes, it started out of an extra bedroom in my house. 1996, I started with a mail order catalog. I ran little classified ads in little newspapers and things like that, saying advertising a free cigar catalog. So I'd fill out the postage on it, put it in the mail, and that's how we started. So it was really just a startup business, but I had a big vision from day one. And the idea was to build a national company that sold cigars. And then later, really what transformed it was around 2001 is where I started looking serious on the retail side, that we can do a lot better than what was out there as far as the consumer experience, and letting people have sort of that experience that you get when you go to a cigar factory or a cigar producing country. The vibe, the energy that's in a cigar factory. So that's what we built our cigar stores very big, with lots and lots of cigars. For anybody who hasn't been to Corona Cigar, we have stores in Central Florida and Orlando. We do get tons of tourists in Orlando. Obviously, a lot of British tourists. We're always coming over as well. And our stores are hard to describe, but like a big drugstore in most other countries. It's about that size. And then we have, smoking. And in Florida, you can smoke cigars in a cigar store. We have cigar bars in them. You can have a cocktail and a cigar. You can smoke outside. So fortunately, we're in a great state that Florida is sort of a hub for America when it comes to premium cigars. There's a big culture here between Tampa, which was the original cigar city, and then you got Miami, which later came online after the Cuban embargo, the Cuban Revolution. That's when the Cubans staked their claim there. And so, the cigar culture came with that as well. And actually, in the early 1800s, it was in Key West when Cubans were leaving the island from the war against Spain for their independence. So Florida has always been sort of the epicenter of cigars in America. And Florida's a big state. Just to put an example, I mean, it's as big as most European countries. So it's a lot of people really don't realize how long it takes to drive from one end of Florida to the other. If you go from Key West, which is the furthest point, 90 miles north of Cuba, and go to let's say the Panhandle, which is the area that goes to the state of Alabama or Mississippi, I mean, that's about a 12-hour car drive, and you're still in the same state. So it's a big place, and we have some pretty big major cities here. But the cigar culture is alive and well. And we have a great climate for cigars. It doesn't freeze here. It doesn't snow, so you can smoke almost year round. There's a few days it gets a little chilly, but we're a great place to smoke cigars. And also politics is really, really important on this. The Florida legislator and the governor and everything else has been really good about leaving the cigar industry alone. We're one of the few states in America that does not have a cigar tax on top of the federal tax. All cigars in America have a federal tax, but each individual state will put cigar taxes on them. And so a cigar that is $10 in Florida could be $20 in California or in New York or in New Jersey. So there's really some states that are at major disadvantage that put serious taxes on cigars.
And part of that, I'm sure, is a big reason why you are so engaged with Cigar Rights of America, why you have always been an avid communicator and an avid fighter for the cigar rights. I would love to come back to that in a little bit, but because you mentioned Florida's impact and its powerful role in the not just United States cigar world, but the global cigar scene. There was tobacco growing operations from the 19th century all the way up till the 1970s, the 70s, right? 77.
Yes.
I mean, even Austria had substantial tobacco growing operations way back in the days. Why did we lose that? Why did we forget about those roots?
We didn't forget about it. We lost it because of labor costs. So as you shift to a global economy, you're going to go to the countries that have the cheapest labor, especially in a labor-intensive industry, which premium cigars, the cigar tobacco, cigar manufacturing, the making of the boxes, it's extremely labor-intensive. So, back in the 1800s, there were cigar shops everywhere in America. And if you guys ever watch like an old cowboy movie, if you ever look where there's a sign that says saloon, normally you're going to see a sign in the backdrop says somewhere cigars, or there'd be a cigar store Indian there. It was part of the culture. And what happened is there were these little factories. Almost every decent sized city had cigar factories there. It didn't matter. It was in Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, wherever they would make cigars. And America was where the tobacco was discovered. So that was the New World product that went back to Europe. And so cigars were always part of the American culture from day one. And, it's one of those things that the tobacco can be grown. If you look at where tobacco still comes from in the US, Connecticut is the place that still has a very vibrant premium cigar agriculture product. Prior to that, though, they used to grow Connecticut shade. Now, Connecticut shade is all tobacco is labor intensive. But when you grow shade tobacco or you grow Cuban seed tobacco, like what we grow at the Florida Sun Grown Farm, you have to pick each leaf off the stalk one at a time. So you don't pull, when you have a plant growing, we use about 15 or 16 leaves on it. You don't pick them all at once. You go through and you pick 2 or 3 at a time, come back through the field a week later, pick another 2 or 3, and you keep repeating that process for about 7 to 8 weeks. That means you have to go through the field with labor 7 to 8 times. Same way on shade tobacco. They start on the bottom primings and work their way up. That's what they do in Nicaragua. That's what they do in Honduras. That's what they do in Dominican Republic. Broadleaf tobacco that's grown in Connecticut, it's called stalk cut. So the plant, it's a short plant with huge leaves. Also, when you have big leaves, you have more weight, more pounds per acre. So that means there's more dollars per acre when you have pounds per acre. So you can send a crew through that field one time. They chop the stalk down, they let it fall on the ground, they let it wilt for a few hours so it doesn't break when they handle it. They let it wilt, and they bring it back in the barns, hang it up. And then when they strip it off the stalks, they put it in bales and put it in a container and ship it. You can still do that, even though the labor is expensive here, but you only had to go through the field once. You can't grow what we grow, or like Cuban style tobacco or shade tobacco in the US profitably, because they can do the same thing in Nicaragua or anywhere in Central America or Ecuador and do it for a fraction of the cost. So when I say fraction of the cost, we're talking about like 100th of the cost of the labor. So that's why it went away. I'm sure that Europe's going to have the same issues, but if it was cigar tobacco is a different thing. You can mechanize that. They still grow a ton of cigarette tobacco in the U.S., but that's because it's mechanized. You have harvesters that literally go through the field and harvest it. They put it in a kiln dryer. It gets dried in 14 days, packed and sold. When we harvest our tobacco, it's got to be hung in the barn. It's got to be sewn onto a lathe or a stick with a string. So every leaf has to be sewn and then has to be hung, and then it's got to stay in the barn for 90 days. Then you got to take it back down and pack it. So all that labor is in there. And that's why it's just so expensive to grow cigar tobacco.
Because you mentioned Connecticut and shade-grown tobacco, I believe Florida was even first to start with shade-grown operations, and Connecticut only afterwards sort of adopted that process, right?
Reinhard's read your history. I see this. That's good. A lot of people don't know that. The original shade tobacco actually was in Sumatra. They brought that seed in Florida, and they were growing sun-grown at the time. There was a farmer from Florida, went to Sumatra and said, hey, we can do the shade. So at first it was made with wooden slats over the field. So you had to put poles up and you put wooden slats to shade out the sun. Well, that was remember I told you that Florida, it shares a border with Alabama, Mississippi, and Alabama and Georgia. That's where the cotton is grown. That's where the cotton, where the textile industry, where they make fabric for clothing. So one of the farmers who was up in North Florida met with a cotton guy and he goes, listen, I can make you this shade cloth, this cheesecloth, and put that up instead of the slats. So the first shade in America was grown. It was actually invented in Florida. And then soon after, the guys up in Connecticut area copied the idea because it works. It's great, right? So yes, the pioneers of it were in North Florida, and that industry was going really strong from the 1800s, and it started tapering off in the mid 1900s because that's when, I don't know about in Europe, in the U.S., when everybody was smoking cigars, when cigarettes got invented, cigar consumption went down, cigarette consumption went up, and cigars and cigarettes are two totally different products, two different types of tobacco. So there was a big decline in the cigar industry in America for years and years and years and years. It really didn't have its resurgence until the 90s. And so prior to that, it was sort of a dying industry. And so between all the less demand for cigars, and then also there was something called homogenized wrapper that was invented, because a lot of the factories back then in the 40s, 50s, and 60s they were switching from handmade to machine made because they had to save labor costs. And cigars were super price sensitive in America. If you ever look at the old boxes or ads, they would say a nickel. And there was a saying in the US, it was like, what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. If they tried to raise the price from 5 cents to 6 cents, a brand would die. I mean, it was like that price sensitive, right? So the manufacturers were constantly trying to figure out, how do I make a cigar cheaper? And so then they invented what's called homogenized tobacco leaf, which is essentially using, it's like a sheet of paper, but instead of using pulpwood, you use tobacco. So it's like a paper made entirely out of tobacco. So with that, you can use leaves that are damaged or don't look good or have holes in them or things that would not be qualified as wrapper. You can make sheet homogenized tobacco. So that caused the demand for wrapper leaf, which is what they grew in Florida, to go down as well. And all that always drives prices down. So it was sort of spiraling out of control between the labor costs, demand going down, homogenized tobacco taking the place of natural wrapper leaf. So that's why the industry kind of went away. And it did have a saving grace, though. The Cuban embargo really threw a lifeline to the Florida cigar tobacco industry, because a lot of the factories in Ybor City, which is in Tampa, Florida, were getting their tobacco from Cuba. So once that supply line stopped, they had to find alternate sources. And at the time, Candela was a very popular wrapper. That's the green leaf. So like when you had Iroa on a couple of weeks ago, his father actually went up. It was up in North Florida. It was one of those pioneers that taught the Florida guys how to fire cure the tobacco, to heat it up, and it dries the leaf green, and that's how you get Candela wrapper. But him and Plasencia and all, and the Olivas and guys like that saw they had farms up in North Florida, but they could tell the labor was killing them. That's why these guys were the pioneers that went to Honduras and Nicaragua. And when those guys started the farms down there, there was nothing. There was no infrastructure, no running water. They were lucky if they had power. So it was, there was sort of the Wild West when they had to restart the industry there. So that's where it's all congregated now.
That interest for history, is that also something that was always with you, or did that really come through the research for the growing operations, the tobacco and the cigar industry?
Well, I like history because I think that's where you learn where you're going in the future. So I've always studied history in any industry or in any government or anything like that, because things that are happening today happened 100 years ago as well. So if you understand history of how things develop, you can keep it from repeating itself or understand what's getting ready to happen. So that's why history is really important, because you'll be surprised how many times the wheel has been reinvented. You can just follow the trends. And so yeah, I love history and any products that were involved. Plus, think about it, cigar history is pretty interesting, right? I mean, there's some really cool stuff there between what happened in Cuba and how it was discovered with the Native Americans smoking it, and there's just such a awesome history on cigars. It's it's very romantic and very I don't know, it's got a great history.
And as you said at the beginning, it builds bridges and it brings us all together. It always amazes me how the humble cigar has the ability and the power to bring people together, no matter where you come from, no matter which religion, color, other beliefs and principles you live on. That humble piece of tobacco leaf has such a uniting power and ability. It's fascinating.
The other part is fascinating too. I know a lot of guys on this Zoom are in Britain as well. When America was founded, the very first colony was Roanoke, and it failed. They came looking for gold in where the United States are. There was no gold. They had timber, but then they had tobacco. Tobacco was the real product that made America. That was the first cash crop that made the new colonies succeed. So it's really part of our history. Corn is the other thing that came out of America. And so in the Capitol building in the United States, where the U.S. Capitol is, if you ever get a tour of it, you'll see on top of the columns, they're decorated with ears of corn, chafes of wheat, and then leaves of tobacco. So it really is part of our culture, and that's why there's so much. If you look at the names of everything, like Sir Walter Raleigh and all these other brands of old tobacco products, it's really was the part of that trade from the U.S. from America and the new colonies back to the New World.
I read a wonderful quote of yours that says something like, "Tobacco doesn't know if it's being grown in 2018 or 1818." Nevertheless, though, what has changed, and how do you see modern technique and the natural evolution kick in and change the way you operate now compared to those early days in Florida?
So the reason I use that saying that the tobacco has no sense of time is that when we were starting our farm back up, we had skipped a generation, meaning that the guys that used to grow the cigar tobacco up in North Florida, those guys had died off. So there was no one for me to really lean on for guidance in Florida about, hey, how do you do this? There's plenty of guys that helped me. Eduardo Fernandez in particular in Nicaragua was a mentor. But anybody that grows cigar tobacco will try to help you because it's such a challenging crop and there's so many things that can go wrong. And a lot of that stuff is out of your control. Sometimes some of that stuff is in your control. So when we talk about the plant, knowing that the Cubans had a big plantation in 1898 in a place called Fort Meade, Florida, which is only about an hour away from my farm is. So they were growing Cuban seed tobacco, sun-grown, which is what we grow, sun-grown tobacco. They did it 120 years ago. So if they did it then, I know we can do it now. It can be done. It's just we got to figure out how they did it and what do we got to do. So if you follow those, and it's really interesting. I went to Connecticut, and a guy named Larry Palumbo used to be the tobacco buyer for Altadis, took me up there and talked to the farmers up there and actually helped me out with how we sow our tobacco. Bought some of their old machines that we sow our tobacco and hang it with. And one a guy named Brandon Setti, who grows broadleaf up north there, gave me a book from the Connecticut Department of Agriculture. It was I don't know, about maybe 100 pages. He was, listen, everything in here is from 1940 and 1950, but it's all the same. Everything they tell you to do is the same. It's just some of the things they talk about, the fungicides or things they used for insect control, fertilizer, that's more modern, but everything else in the process is the same. Same thing in Florida. A guy named Gene Tipton, who passed away last year, he grew up in that area and he'd been in the business for 70 years. And he's like, he introduced me to some people and gave me an old book as well. And so just, if you Google stuff, Google has these old books that are scanned, old documents from the 1800s and early 1900s. And you can look up how to grow tobacco. It's right in there. And it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, because we had an agrarian society in America. So before the Industrial Revolution. So the U.S. government would spend a lot of time and effort on documenting what works. Because remember, you got to feed a new nation. So it was about, hey, how do you grow these crops in each one of your states? And here's how to do it. And there was lots of research being done. So we have those old documents. And so, you can follow that. It's like the cookbook on what to do. But then you need to apply modern techniques to enhance that. When I say modern techniques, like we use drip irrigation. They didn't have drip irrigation back then. They kind of do it like they do in Nicaragua. They flood the rows with water and let the water go down the row and the tobacco gets irrigated. You can do that, but there's a lot of labor. Somebody's got to drag those hoses every day and, water each row. We use automatic timers. We use drip irrigation. We use something called plastic mulch. It's a biodegradable black film that goes over the soil that keeps the moisture in the soil. Our fertilizer is the plants need the same nutrients they needed 100 years ago. You got nitrogen, potassium, potash, and phosphorus. And so those are the same fertilizers that you need today, except it's more modern. We use a liquid fertilizer that gets injected into the drip irrigation, so the plants get a steady dose of the food and nutrients that they need over every day of their life cycle, versus broadcasting dry fertilizer where they get it three feedings over 3 months, and it's sort of like they eat a lot and then they get hungry, and then they eat a lot and get hungry. We keep our tobacco fed from day one, so you get a much better plant. So there's tons of things that you can do modern, but at the end of the day, there's the process of growing is the same the way it was 100 years ago. And then when it comes to like fungicide and stuff, everybody's always talking about, oh, you got black mold or blue mold and black shank and things like that. And those are problems, believe it or not. I mean, Cuba's got a big problem with black shank, and there's ways to control it. There's a lot of modern agri-science, and there's a lot of new organic compounds that can be used to battle those things or prevent them from happening, but they're expensive. These companies that develop these cutting edge safe products, that's the big key with any new product that's used for controlling pests or weeds or fungus, goes through a process. It's almost like the in America, it's called Food and Drug Administration, and then the Environmental Protection Agency. You have to go through all these tests to make sure things are safe, they don't damage the environment. The end of that is that when we go buy them as the farmer, they cost a fortune. I mean, they are unbelievable how expensive they are, but they work, and we do use them. It gives us great tobacco, and at the same time, doesn't do damage to the environment, and it's safe to work around too. So, you know, there's been a lot of big advancements in agriculture. You know, I know I'm getting in the weeds here, and some people might not, you know, want to digest all this, but this is what wonderful. You got to do when you're growing great tobacco.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful, and we get wonderful feedback. Albert on Facebook just commented that there's some really cool inside information there that people normally wouldn't hear. So please rock and roll and continue with it. Now,
yeah. So one of the good parts, I just want to build on that though. One of the good parts about being in America and not having that generational thing passed on is I had to go into it with a very open mind and look at all the different science that's available. Look at the tried and true techniques and the new stuff that's coming out of the universities and things like that. Meld them together, because there's some old products too. I always talk about this. Hiroshi Robanya, one of the great tobacco growers out of Cuba. He's been to my farm, and we were having fun and talking to him one day, and he's like, you know, get horse manure. It's great. It's great for adding organic material, and it's true. They've been using that for years, right? For centuries, or since man's been around. And so we bring in compost to horse manure, but at the same time, we use, you know, liquid fertilizer that's injected through the drip irrigation. So we go from old school and new school, and you combine the two, and you really end up with a good product. So you don't want to turn your back on that old stuff as well. You just want to, you know, what works, and you combine it. You know, we kind of see that in our own lives with things that help us out. That, you know, when grandma said eat chicken soup when you're catching a cold, it works. There's a reason. Or the green tea we talk about. I mean, that, you know, they've been talking about, you know, the benefits of antioxidants in green tea for, you know, probably 5,000 years. But so there's new stuff and old stuff that work.
The history component and tradition aside, when you think about the unique terroir of Florida and its impact on the tobacco that you're growing, what is it that makes it so special? And also linked to that is sort of a second part to my question. I believe you switched early on from Criollo to Corojo 99, which is what you now grow primarily. In the wine industry, for example, you always try to find that perfect fit and balance between the soil and the grape varietal that you're about to use. How do you go about that?
So I went back to the history books. The two types of tobacco that were grown in Florida was shade grown, which is a Sumatra seed variety, and then sun grown, which was Cuban seed variety. In Eduardo Fernandez in Nicaragua grows only Cuban seed tobacco, right? He was growing two seeds, Criollo and Corojo. So Criollo, Corojo 99, Criollo 98. So he gave me the seeds to test. He goes, plant them both, see how they do. We planted them. They both grew equally well. They were very hard to tell the difference when we did our test crop. Once we put it in the barn, it got all mixed up, because the first year was sort of like a circus trying to figure out how to get tobacco into the field and into the barn on time. So, but we established both plants did great in our soil, and we kind of already knew that we knew it could grow there, because there's like I said, an hour away was where the Cubans were growing like 400 acres of it back in 1898. So we knew and we know the climate's right. We know the growing season. So it's just kind of drilling down on which seed variety. So Corojo 99 is what we stuck with, just because I like the flavor of Corojo tobacco. I think to me, it's the best tasting. There is a new Corojo 2012 that Cuba had developed, and I planted that this year, and I planted a little bit last fall. Plant grows great. So we're going to see how it does. It's, you know, in the field, you can't really tell the difference, because it's just a minor difference in the genetics of it. What Cuba keeps playing around with is they have that problem of black shank. Black shank is a root disease, causes the stalk and the roots to rot on the plant. And what happens is that when you don't have a lot of access to fungicides and you're growing the same place all the time, if you get a soil-borne disease, it's hard to get rid of. So the best way to combat it is through genetics. So if you find certain tobacco that is resistant to it, that's what they want to grow. So that's the main reason why they switched to Crow 2012 is to combat that black shank. Fortunately, we don't have black shank. Our soil is really sandy. It's sandy like Connecticut, but climate like Cuba, because we're not too far away from Cuba. So the soil we have, fortunately, I've never had black shank. We have a different thing we have to deal with. It's a type of fungus that's in the soil, which is a good fungus. It's what biodegrades any type of organic matter. It's how your soil is living. The problem is that fungus, when it gets on the leaves, it tries to start degrading the leaf as well. So we have to keep the dust down, and we do have to keep that fungus off of our tobacco plants. But we've learned how to control it, and we know how to work with it. So that was a challenge for the first couple of years. So we do get wrapper out of our farm, which was the goal from day one, is that if you shoot for wrapper, you'll always get filler. If you only try to grow filler, you'll never have wrapper. And what separates between wrapper and filler, people don't realize, is that all tobacco, if it was perfect, would be wrapper. If it's cigar tobacco, meaning perfect, no holes, no stains, even color, good elasticity, that's what nice oily leaves. That's what you look for in wrapper. Problem is you got Mother Nature. You got wind that breaks tobacco. You can have hail, puts holes in tobacco. You got bugs that eat holes in tobacco. You got fungus that will make spots on the tobacco. And you got workers, so when you're handling it, it's delicate. Their fingers go through the tobacco. And then when you hang it, you can damage it. And when you bring it down, you can damage it. So every way you can start out with I always say a field starts out 100% wrapper until Mother Nature get it and people touch it. Then it's gonna, you'll end up with a percentage of wrapper. So we've been yielding now. We're doing pretty good. We're getting probably close to almost 40% wrapper. But we throw a lot of leaves away on the farm and don't even hang them because I know they're not going to qualify as wrapper. If it doesn't look good, if it's got holes on both sides, the labor's too expensive for us to hang and harvest tobacco that's not very good on the plant. We just throw it on the ground. So that's what we do.
Jeff, I'd love to bring in a quick question from Sai, our dear brother in Ireland, that perfectly fits what you were just describing before.
The sun has faced me, so you'll have to read the question because I can't see it on my screen.
You're just on mute. Please fire away if you want to with your question.
Who are you talking? Who are you calling, Reinhardt?
Pardon?
You, Sai.
Oh, me, is it? All right,
Yeah.
Sorry, it just went blank. No, hi, Jeff. Just, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, it's just I found it interesting when you were saying about the 1800s and early 1900s in Miami, Tampa, Florida, and all that, because there was over 7,000 small factories there, and obviously the Latino American element and all that came into it. And then by 1940, the homogenized leaf and all that being thrown out there, because the King Edward was the biggest selling cigar in the USA and the world at the time, due to the war and certain things as well. So I found it very interesting on that. You answered my question on that one that I was asking earlier. But I just want to ask you a simple question. What do you think of you're talking about leaf and you're talking about everything like that, and with you being a farmer and all, and in the States, what do you think of some people bringing in genetically modified tobacco?
Well, everything that you're smoking right now is genetically modified. So what happens is that there's a lot of misinformation on what genetically modified is.
Yeah.
Human beings have been genetically modifying agriculture products since the day of time. What that means is if you're breeding, we raise cattle as well. So a British breed, your Herefords and your Angus, are superior genetics when it comes to marbling and carcass quality of the beef. However, they don't do that good in tropical environments, like in Florida, Texas, Central America, and Brazil. So which cattle do real well with that? The Brahma breed. The Brahmas are the ones with the big hump on their back, right? Problem with Brahmas is they mature slower than a Hereford or an Angus. But you can leave them out in the wild and they'll survive. They won't die from disease, and they do pretty doggone good on their own. So what do? We have crossbreeds. You have Brangus, which is Brahma and Angus. You have Brayford, Brahma and Hereford. In America right now, the number one breed is pretty much Angus with some Brahma in it. So that's a genetically modified organism, right? It's crossbred. Now apply that towards plants. Tobacco, when we talked about Criollo and Corojo, the Corojo 99 versus the Corojo 2012, what it is, it's crossbreeding different plants. And what the Cubans have a whole university for this. And what they'll do, they'll take seed varieties. They've done everything. They've taken, and it's by cross-pollination. So they'll take seed varieties from Sumatra, they'll take Virginia, they'll take Connecticut. Even Connecticut broadleaf has several different seed varieties. And so this has been going on for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. Same way you have different types of corn and things like that. Now, this is where people, genetically modified organisms, the reason it gets a bad, they should really call it something else, because the reason why the news has bad words for GMOs is that there's a herbicide called glyphosate. The original name was called Roundup. Glyphosate is a non-selective herbicide. What that means is that whatever you spray it on, it kills it. So if you're using glyphosate on a field of corn or soybeans or wheat, and you have this one plant of corn that doesn't die when you spray it on it, that becomes a Roundup ready plant. That was a seed. They took the seed from that plant because that plant, you can spray Roundup, wouldn't die. So those became a patented type of seed variety. It was called Roundup Ready. You could plant the field in that tobacco, in that corn, spray Roundup on it, won't kill it. Well, then glyphosate's got some health problems with it. And so then, and then Monsanto, who owned Roundup, started suing farmers that had corn that had any of the genetic makeup of their patented seed variety. Well, pollen floats through the air. So you could have one farm that has patented corn on it. You have another farmer who raises his own seed. He would get a knock on the door from a lawyer saying, hey, you need to pay us royalties for that seed variety because it's got our DNA in it from our patented plant. That's what caused this whole mess. And that's how the whole GMO thing became a bad word. So that's why we have to differentiate between the negative context of genetically modified organisms versus varietals. So I know that may or may not make sense, but that's how what it is.
But what happens if you spray, just say, for example, you spray that Roundup, which is damn not good stuff, it's not good stuff for health wise. But if you spray that tobacco to get rid of the weeds or whatever, and then you plant, you rip up you get your corn out and all that, and then you plant tobacco seed in there. Will that affect the tobacco seed or the leaves in times to come?
It would still, see, Roundup works. The way glyphosate works. It's a foliar application. It doesn't go through the soil and the roots. What it is, let's get on the leaves. So what happens is like we don't use Roundup on tobacco because it'd kill it. Even what's called spray drift, even if little droplets get on it, it'll kill tobacco. Tobacco is really sensitive to herbicides. Super sensitive to it. Tobacco is a tough plant. I tell you what, it's really tough when it comes to weather or wind and things like that. It's pretty doggone tough. But herbicides, man, it's super sensitive to it. So, but you could have a field that had glyphosate used on it for a prior crop, and plant tobacco would still grow because glyphosate is supposed to be a non-residual in the soil, and pretty much you can still grow over it.
Oh, okay.
But we don't have to use glyphosate. We don't even use herbicide, and the reason being is that we use old school techniques. We use turning the soil to cultivate it. And I've learned to work with we have what I used to think was a weed. It's called nutsage. It's a type of grass. And when you look at our field versus other countries, I have grass in between my plants. And there's a reason for that. Remember I told you there's a fungus in the soil. If the dust gets on the leaves, it starts to eat our leaves and leaves these spots. The best way to control dust is by having a layer of grass on the ground. So when you're driving any, the little there's things we call chuck wagons, whatever, that you drive around through the field and stuff, or a tractor or whatever. You don't have a cloud of dust if you have that layer of grass in the ground. So we use it to our benefit, and unfortunately don't have to use any herbicide.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.
One thing I would love to know is organic is a very important topic in agriculture now globally, and the Plasencia family did some trial runs with organic tobacco. Do you see that as a way forward, or is it a mere dream to grow tobacco organically?
I don't see it as a way forward, and the reason I tell you why is that the part that people don't realize about organic, let's say organic fruit, what you don't see is think about this. Why is a tomato that's not organic and one that is organic, why is the one that's organic cost so much more if you didn't have to spray any herbicides, fungicides, or pesticides on it? It should be cheaper, right? It's not, though. You know why? Because for every one tomato that you see in the store that's organic that you are willing to eat, there's 2 of them that got thrown away. Because at the end of the day, the world has insects, it has fungus, and it has weeds. So if you don't spray for bugs, you're gonna have holes in whatever it is. Whether it's your apple, it's gonna have worms in it. Every third or fourth one. There's a farmer saying it's one for the farmer, one for the bug, and one for the bird, because that's the way it used to be. But now people want to get fruit, they want it to be perfect. If you talk to your grandfather and you say, well, we used to get fruit, it used to be seasonal. There was a season when you could get apples or oranges, and there was a season you couldn't, right? Now we get year-round produce. Why? Because it's picked early and shipped all around the world. And when you see stuff in the store, there is no, most kids don't even know that apples used to have worms in them, right? But you have to look at an old book for a kid and show a worm coming out of it. Well, that's because we spray for worms now. Or if it's organic, the one that has a worm, it gets thrown away. So there's tons of waste involved with organic. Now for us, we try to use both. We use a fungicide that is organic, and we also use, there's something called neem oil out of India that we use. We spray that as well because it help keep the fungus from even getting on our tobacco plant. So we use organic products, but I will say this: when we have something called budworms or hornworms, which are a worm that eats tobacco, man, these things can eat holes in leaves overnight. We have to spray for those. But in the old days, they used what was called broadband pesticides, the DDTs of the world. I mean, whatever the hell you sprayed it on, it'd kill it. And they, it'd get into water and things like that. Now we have to use something called, can't think of the name of it right now, but it's $900 a gallon, and it's from Dow Chemical. It's very expensive, but guess what? It's real safe. The only thing it kills is a worm. You can, because we raise honey on our farm too. There's a big issue, this is a real issue, about honeybees getting killed. Because what happens is when you use a non-selective a pesticide, you kill other bugs that are beneficial, which bees are not only beneficial, but they're necessary. So that's why they started developing certain pesticides that only kill that particular pest that you're targeting, and that have a short, what's called either a zero residual or very short, meaning that the time after you spray it, there's an interval between that and harvest time. And most of the stuff you use now, in 24 hours, it oxygenates and there's zero residual left. But that's why the approved chemicals that are approved by the FDA and the EPA are really expensive. And so it is something better. But if you tried to grow organic tobacco, if the consumer was willing to have cigars that have wrapper leaves that have stains on them or holes in them or spots on them, in order to get ones that were perfect that are grown organic, you're gonna have to throw a lot away. So you're either gonna pay a whole bunch more for it, or you can use safe and effective types of pesticides that, like what we do.
Good point. Now, from one end of the industry, the sandy soils, all the way to the retail component, where you translate the product to the end consumer, and where you build that whole bridge from the very beginning all the way to the people who ultimately enjoy the product. What were some of the experiences from the retail side that helped you sort of link back to the farming operations and probably vice versa? So like, how do those two connect for you? How do they influence each other? And what are some of the key learnings that you draw from one or the other?
Well, the thing about cigar consumers that, and you'll see that in the fine whiskeys of the world and the fine wines of the world, the consumers that enjoy these products really want to learn more and know more about it. They want to know about the seed varieties. They want to know about the countries that produce it. They want to know about the factories. And with technology, with shows like this and the ability of the internet for people to search and research, they're really, I mean, they know their stuff when it comes to these products. So people are naturally wanting to be able to, the whole farm to table concept. That's why it gained traction. That's why people want to know where their food comes from. That's, you know, they because they're learning things and they understand that, well, you know, why are some chicken breasts, you know, like gigantic and then others are a little bit smaller? Well, they kind of learn the difference of what's the difference between, you know, certain types of chickens or whatever. So people want to see the farm. They want to see how it, and also people who smoke cigars understand how much work goes into making it, or at least after they educate themselves on it, they understand how much work goes into it. And so they want to see that. And a lot of people are appreciative of the hard work that goes into it. They're appreciative of the people that do make the cigars and grow the tobacco. So for us, it was just a nice thing to be able to kind of close that circle of life of how it starts from a seed and ends up in a cigar. And you know, so as a retailer, and not only just as a retailer, but as a cigar enthusiast, that's what I was interested in. And the first time I went to a tobacco farm or a factory, I was like, wow, this is awesome. It really was cool seeing how these products come out and the work. You have a totally different appreciation of it, right? Once you've been to a box factory, you'll never look at a cigar box the same once you've seen how these things are made. And you'll never look at a cigar the same once you've been to a factory. And you'll never look at the tobacco the same once you've been to a tobacco farm. So for us, that's why we did it. And I, you know, I understand why. So it was pretty easy for me to grasp that, why people like it. And we've been fortunate enough to do that. And my wife just walked in behind me. So here, say hello, Tanya. We have people from the UK, from Europe, all over. So this is my Scottish wife from Glasgow.
Hello, how are you?
What a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for joining us as well. That's wonderful.
So she just came from the shop. I came from the farm to do this show. So we kind of, that's the thing. We had to work both ends of it.
We truly appreciate it. Jeff, what I'm curious is, me working as an experienced designer and with my background in hospitality, I very much loved when at the beginning you said it's about creating that customer experience, about that journey when people come into Corona Cigar Shop, Lounge, or Davidoff in Tampa. What do you think the retail community could focus on more or could do to improve and make sure that with all these thousands of retail spots and lounges across the United States and globally, we all do a better job of providing those holistic and meaningful experiences?
So I think personally that the industry has really done a good job of the transformation from when I was back in the 90s, when I was really into cigars, before I even started Corona Cigar, the way cigar shops were in America, the cigar store was in a mall. You could never smoke in a mall, right? And then the high-end lounge places were like a country club, private club. And the problem that, listen, I didn't come from a wealthy background, so I was never that guy that had that membership at one of these fancy clubs. So where does the average Joe, you know, have access to smoking a cigar? And so when I created our Corona Cigar retail concept in 2002, the idea was to have this massive store, big bar, seating inside and out, in a safe space to smoke cigars. Now, when I say safe space, what does that mean? Well, meaning that if you were outside smoking a cigar, you're not going to have somebody walking across the street doing this and making ugly faces at you and all that other crazy stuff that we as cigar smokers are always, you know, exposed to when you're out in public. I'm like, man, because I don't want to be feeling like I can't enjoy my cigar if I got, you know, I feel like I got people all angry at me because I'm smoking a cigar. So that's what Corona Cigar was. Hey, this is what we do. Come, cigar guys, you're welcome. This is what we do. So it's been highly successful for us, and other retailers saw that concept works. And so there's a lot of great cigar shops and lounges now in America, and in for example, in Britain. Britain has some of the worst cigar rules or smoking rules anywhere. It's crazy. Can't smoke anywhere, right? But then what did you see? You saw some hotels starting to put these little huts or whatever, where they're, it's cold in Britain. And so they got the heaters going, and it might not be big, but it's a place you can enjoy a cigar and you can get a cocktail from the bar or whatever. So you've seen that adapt, because once business guys realize that it can be done, where at the end of the day, no business can survive if it's not profitable. So unless there's a group of consumers that are going to support that cigar bar or lounge or whatever, it's not going to work. But people are saying it can work. But at the end of the day, what is our number one thing that stands in our way? It's the rules from the government, and that government can be local, can be city, county, state, or national or federal in our case. And I'm sure it's the same way across, whether Britain or UK or Europe or whatever. You probably have a town that can say, oh, you can't have a cigar bar. You might have another that says you can. I don't know. But the idea is that if there's, people innovate, and there's definitely guys that want to enjoy cigars. And so if the key for us was that you got to be able to pair it with good whiskey or good spirits, because a cigar lounge on its own, if you don't have that bar component bringing in revenue, it's hard to pay for the expenses to operate just off of a cigar sale. You can run a cigar store and operate and make money without having the lounge component. The lounge has to be able to pay for itself too. So there are challenges in some areas where you can't combine the two. It's crazy. Like in Chicago, you can smoke cigars in a club, but you can't sell the liquor. Okay, so what do you got to do? Then you got to sell the membership, because at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for the facility. So the industry, in my opinion, has gotten much better as a consumer. I find any city I can go to, I can usually find a place I can go smoke a cigar. It's a little tougher in Britain, but there's places that it can happen. But again, the challenge is having the local governments allow it, and that's where people just have to be involved. If you go before your city council and convince them, hey, this is a good thing. It's good for the business community. It's good for the community overall. And sometimes you can win, but I can tell you this, you'll never win if you don't try. So, that's my suggestion on it.
Brilliant. Great insights. And it's inspiring if somebody like yourself, Jeff, has seen the industry from all angles and worked all the way from the roots of the plant to inspiring the end consumer and enjoying great cigars. It's all those little details, it's all those little steps, and it sort of all comes together when we sit down and we share a cigar and share a great experience. Because of timely constraints, we need to be a little cautious of our timing today, but I'd love to bring in Ian for a quick question, our dear friend from the UK. Fire away, Ian.
Hi, Jeff. And just to say, I've been to your West Sand Lake and to Lake Mary and really had a great time there. Your staff are excellent, really good knowledge of the industry, and gave some good recommendations. And I haven't been there for a few years. I hope you're not bringing in all the TV screens that we get in some cigar lounges, because I want to talk to people and not watch the sports. So please do that. And I'd also say your website is great. I love your website. I look on that, and some of your competitors think they can't display to the UK, but you can. There's no restriction on that. And if you could sell mail order to the UK, I'd certainly be a customer. So please think of that. That would be great.
I wish we could. I'll tell you what happened there. Years ago, I tried. We tried shipping cigars to the UK, but sometimes they can slip through, but sometimes they don't. And when they don't, what happens is the shipping is so expensive to go there. They send them back and they bill us both ways. So it's really tough for a business to do it. It's much easier and better. One of the problems is our name of our company, right? Corona Cigar Company. So they see the package, they know it's cigars, right? And in the way things are now with shipping accounts, we can't fake our name. But so the best way for anybody to ship things back and forth through these countries is through individuals, because a package from, you know, Ian McGregor to John Smith, customs isn't you know, they're not looking through that. But if it comes from Corona Cigar, they're going to say, oh, there's cigars in there, you know? So you're either going to get a big tax bill when it arrives, or it's going to get kicked back to us. But I'm glad you got to stop by. Like I said, Orlando is a really great place for people from Europe to travel to, from UK and Europe to come to. And Florida is open, by the way. So hopefully some of these restrictions will end pretty soon. I know there's a lot of tight travel restrictions right now, but Florida is wide open, and the state is really doing good. So we do miss our international friends coming over and having the patter back and forth and catching up on things. So hopefully you guys will be able to come back and enjoy Orlando soon, and Tampa.
I wouldn't mind paying the tax. My brother bought some cigars over, and I told him that the saving on the cigars would have paid for his flights.
Right.
They're about 25 to 30% of the cost of what they'd be in the UK. I mean, it's a massive discount. So even if I have to pay 100% tax, I'm still saving money. But,
plus the accessibility to brands. That's the other thing. There's a lot of, you know, obviously America has no Cubans. So we have a huge, you know, when you pick up a magazine, you see all these brands listed. Like Corona Cigars is a very large store, so we have tons of cigars. So you can find them in our store. So it's not unusual. We get people in from Brazil, because a lot of Brazilians who come to Orlando too, from Brazil and from the UK and all over Europe, with, even if they don't smoke cigars, they'll have this list, right? Hey, my buddy sent me with this list. Do you have these? And so, yeah, that's very common, because I think you can bring like 100 premium cigars per person. So that's 4 boxes. And if you got 2 people, that's 8 boxes. So that's a good amount of cigars that people were bringing back. So yeah, that's another way to skin the cat.
my brother's just outside New Smyrna Beach, so I hope to be over sometime, and I'll try and visit you again. Thank you very much.
We look forward to that.
Jeff, I probably have another 20 questions on my list that I still want to ask you, and I would love to do a second part of our interview with you whenever your time allows, because there's so much more we should get into when it comes to the growing operations, and I truly hope that everybody who is watching this will have a chance and will find the opportunity to come and see you at Florida Sun Grown, see the farming operations, and obviously visit the Corona Cigar Company. But the one thing that I would still love to know is, you spoke about the history component earlier. Do you think that we all can learn from the past, and do we as human beings? And for the cigar industry in particular, what could be the one thing that we all should learn, look forward to, and evolve into a better industry?
You know, that's an interesting question, because I was with somebody who's running for Congress. I was with him yesterday, and we were talking. In America, there was this negative connotation called a smoke-filled room, like backroom deals were done, right? And I told him, I said, you know what, the best thing, because right now there's a lot of division, not only in America but around the world, right? It's if they brought back those smoke-filled rooms and where these guys, where you get a different political parties, because right now people don't talk to each other, right? So whether if they're conservative or if they're liberal, a lot of times they're in their own world and no one wants to talk to each other. And I'm like, well, maybe if everybody just lit up a cigar and sat around and talked to each other, maybe we'd understand each other better. And instead of everybody dug into their little holes, we could come up with make some progress on this stuff. So you talk about going back, right? Because back in the old days, that's what it was. The people would, it's no different than today, where you got, 4 or 5 people that run Congress, that they hash out the deal and the bill finally goes through, right? Well, in the old days, they used to sit around, smoke cigars and hash it out and get it done. So that's why I jokingly say, if we could bring that back, we'd probably be in a lot better situation. And even when look at global leaders, used to do that all the time. And if you watch the old cowboy movies, the peace pipe that would go around. The tobacco has a history of this. Tobacco has a history of solving some problems here. Just everybody let's take some time and enjoy a cigar and talk it out. And in the end, you can usually, you understand where the other guy's coming from and come up with something that kind of works for both. So that's the part on cigars. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the smoke-filled rooms because they won't allow it. But if they did, I say America and the world would be a better place.
What would be your wish for Corona Cigar and Florida Sun Grown over the next couple of years? And the industry is booming right now. Where do you see your projects and your endeavors headed?
Well, one of the things that we never stopped, ever since I started it out of my house, we've never stopped growing. And like we're opening a new store in Sarasota, Florida, the beginning of next year. So there's so many things that we've got going on, and the key is it's steady growth. This is a family-owned company. My wife and I and myself, and I got 2 kids that are growing up, and they may end up be in the business later. Who knows? They're young, and let them do what they want to do. But I always joked and saying that I started my business with MasterCard, Visa, and Discover. Those are my three partners, and it's because we're family-owned and independent. We can kind of take whatever directions we want to go, and everything we do is really about. At the end of the day, I'm a cigar enthusiast, nut, whatever you want to say. I love it, and so I get it. What guys like and women like when they're smoking cigars. So that's what we're always focused on. Just trying to make sure that the consumer experience is the best, whether that's an online, through coronacigar.com or in our retail stores, or and then the guys that want to geek out on the cigar farming end of it with me. And so we just keep focusing and keep moving ahead. And listen, Corona Cigar doesn't operate unless it's got a great staff, which is what we have. And so we have a huge team, and all our guys love cigars too. So when you stop by one of our stores, they'll take care of you and say hi, and they're one of us. You know what I mean? These guys love cigars. So that's kind of we don't have any crazy plans that are any different than what we've had from the day we started 25 years ago. Just keep moving ahead and keep focused on the customers. And I'm bullish on the industry. People say it's in a little bit of a boom right now. I don't like to use the word boom because in the past it was a fad stage in the 90s, which was sort of an artificial demand that was there, mostly driven by celebrities and things like that. Now the demand that we have going on is from people that just love cigars. They're sharing it with other people, and people are learning more and more about it through social media, through the internet, and things like that. So the growth that we've had in the industry is real. It's sustainable, and it's good. It's been at a level that's not so crazy that you've got. During the boom, there were some bad things that happened. You had guys getting into business were totally just about the dollar. Let's try and make some quick money. And there were some really bad cigars that came out. Nowadays, that's not the case. The products that you're seeing out, the innovation and stuff, these are good cigars. And people are still in it for the right reason, which is let's get a great product for the consumer. So while people will say the industry's booming, I would say it's healthy growth, and it's manageable, because in the 90s it was nuts. I mean, you would have cigars that had tobacco in it that was 1 season old. I mean, it was grown last year. And in cigars, anybody knows about cigars, it takes time. You can't rush. Arturo Fuente cigars, you cannot rush the hands of time. It's true. You can't do that in cigars. You can't do that in whiskey either. Same thing like Scotch whiskey. I really admire the Scotch whiskey guys, with their age statements and how long, there's so much integrity that goes on in that business. When they say a whiskey's 18 years, you can trust it. It's 18 years old before it goes in the bottle. You can't make an 18-year-old whiskey in 8 years. So cigars are kind of the same way. So we're in a good stage.
That's a very positive note to end on. Jeff, it was such a pleasure to have you. We'll have to do a second part, that's for sure.
But I'm all for it. Just let me know.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure and honor to have you. To all of you folks, I wish you a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Wednesday, rest of the week. And as Jeff very well said, you got to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going. And I'll leave you with that for today. And hopefully we'll see you all again next week for another inspiring Light 'em Up show. Jeff Borschiewicz, it was a pleasure and honor. Many thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.